Shabbat shalom to those of you who are on YouTube. Welcome, and I appreciate you tuning in to another session or another teaching. Um, we have been in this ministry for about almost 3 years. I think December 2nd was actually our third year since the filing of the Articles of Incorporation as a nonprofit here in Colorado. And I can tell you that there is a lot that has gone on. We started out in a church where we were occupying that church on Saturdays. And I can tell you some of my original members are the result of somebody making an announcement on Sunday morning saying, if you want to get in touch with the Hebrew roots of your faith, come to this Saturday morning service. In fact, one of my board of directors is one of those original members. So when we are talking about after his heart ministry, we had a humble beginning in a church. Well, eventually we got kicked out of that church for an absolutely anti-Semitic. I mean, I can prove that that's what it was. There was just this total disdain for Jews and for Israel, and it was crazy. So at any rate, once that landlord decided to have us kick rocks, we got on Zoom because it was COVID anyways. In fact, we were kind of pushing the limits of how many people we could have in the church and that kind of stuff as far as COVID went. So it was interesting because once that happened, we got onto Zoom. We had a board meeting and they were like, well, how do we outreach now if we don't have a community? And I said, well, let's build an online community. And so I got on TikTok and pulled some people in from TikTok who were interested. And next thing you know, we had a congregation. Well, about a year ago, almost about this time last year, we made a decision that we were going to move from just a Zoom call with the original people to an actual YouTube channel. All of a sudden, out of the middle of nowhere, we had the money for the digital whiteboard. We had the money for a upgraded camera, everything that we needed to move forward into YouTube. Well, here we are in YouTube. But now the reason why this is so important is because I'm going to give you a little bit of history about my journey as a Messianic, Hebrew roots, Torah observant, whole Bible believer. But however, you would like to categorize me as somebody who does not accept the antinomian, anti-Semitic sentiment of the Christian church at large. So I will tell you that when I had my moment of, okay, something's wrong, we need to probably change the way we believe, the way we walk, the way we do our process with God, came in 2007. And it was basically me going head to head with somebody who was a Messianic apologist, me being a Reformed theologist with an acceptance of the Calvinistic, the 5 points of Calvin. So basically a very fundamental Calvinist. I couldn't win the argument. And it had to do with when Yeshua was resurrected. And although we're not going to get into that today, there is unequivocal proof that he was resurrected on the Sabbath. And so that really kind of put a wrench in my works. And next thing you know, there was a wrench in my Trinity doctrine. There was a wrench in my Sunday morning service doctrine. There was a wrench in everything that I had done. And I got to tell you, I don't know about everybody else, but basically I just got angry. And when I got angry, I just started parroting this information. I didn't really dig into it and see if I believed it. I just knew that I had been wrong. Here's a new information being presented, so I'm just going to propagate it, right? And I will tell you that I remained a parrot for a long time, whether it be a parrot of Lou White and Fossilized Customs, whether it be a parrot of Michael Boaz and First Fruits of Zion, whether it be a parrot of Rabbi Messer or a parrot of Avi ben Mordecai. I was just repeating things. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that if we accept that the things that were being taught by those people are true, right? But one of the things that I really, really worried about, because when I was a Calvinist, when I was a Reformed Christian, and let me explain to you, I mean, like Luther's sermons were exciting to me. I knew the numbers of them. I knew the names of them. I knew the things that he had said. One of the best sermons he ever preached was about how if you want to be a expositor of the Bible, then you need to learn the ancient languages, which is what motivated me to learn Greek and Hebrew, and eventually tried to look into Aramaic and etc. Another one, ironically enough, was the sermon, and it's the intention behind the sermon and everything was the sermon that talks about tearing down pulpits and burning synagogues. I can tell you those sermons were fire for me. They were exciting for me. So when I come to the other side of this thing, I had already done some teaching. I stood in front of the pulpit and gave some basic sermons about, Christ and the cross, and gave an altar call, and people came to the altar. So I must have preached a good message, right? I remember getting down on my face and weeping bitterly. I like to call it blowing snot bubbles. I was just broken. I could not believe. I was like, I do not ever want to teach again. I'm just going to figure this out for myself, and I'm going to move forward, and that's just how it's going to be. Well, that triggered, after a number of, for lack of better words, political moves by the powers that be within the shroud of Messianic whole Bible believer, Hebrew roots, etc. There was a conflict that occurred with our congregation and two teachers that, if I mentioned their names, you would know who they were. They were coming to our church and they were preaching, and one got jealous of the other coming because they didn't agree with everything. And next thing you know, we had a mess. That sent me on a journey of basically, aside from not okayness, which was basically just this whole idea of like, well, what are you doing? Right? Like, God, stop. You are driving me crazy. You are flipping the script. You're flipping my doctrines upside down. You're flipping my attitude upside down. Everything is going on. And now all of a sudden I'm in the middle of this political conflict between two leaders. And so we're just doing the church all over again. I was like, I'm done. I walked away. And when I walked away, I decided to throw every single last doctrine out. And I also decided to open my mind to the possibility that I wasn't in the right religion. And in that process, studied many other religions. One of the things I discovered, and I will just share with you, I mean, this is kind of a side note. There's only one religion on the face of this earth that offers a clear conscience as a result of an unmerited favor. What I mean by that is that most clear consciences are offered by satiating in some way the God who you worship, through sacrifice, through human suffering, through whatever. Literally, he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, wow, I'm the righteousness of God, and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't take away from it. I can't add to it. Okay, I guess we're sticking with Christianity, but I know all this junk now, right? So to start over in the Bible, start in Genesis chapter 1, and God left me in Genesis chapter 1 for 10 years. Okay? For 10 years, I was not allowed to get out of Genesis chapter 1. But in that process, I gleaned so much information. And one of the greatest things I learned was the vessel and what happens with the vessel. And I'm going to get to this. But what I want you to know is that's when I stopped being a parrot. I stopped conforming. I stopped saying, yep, that doctrine's true, unless I myself proved it was true. And this is going to sound really arrogant, but I just came up with my own doctrine. I have my own confession. I have my own list of things that are tenets and whatnot. Well, in the middle of nowhere, eventually somebody asked me to teach. And so now, as a ministry, we have our own tenets, blah, blah, blah. Well, what was the model? The model was, if it doesn't work, if it's not real, if it's not acceptable to me as an experience versus just this guy in this pulpit telling me that's how it is, it's gone. And that's as simple as it was. And me and God had an agreement. The agreement was simple. No matter what, I was not allowed to be deceived. I was not allowed to be led astray, because if even once I discovered that I had been led astray and he had let that happen, I was done with him. And he knew that. Well, I can tell you there was a lot of things I didn't know. I didn't know about the Na'um. I've talked to you a little bit about the Na'um. It's the place in between asleep and awake where God speaks to his prophets. It's this transcendental place where you are not all the way awake and you are not all the way asleep. So you are able to dream, but you are lucidly dreaming. Okay. And in that process, that's where God speaks to his prophets, but that's also where the growl is. And I didn't know anything about ancient pictographic Hebrew. I didn't know anything about anything. All I knew is that sometimes when I was starting to wake up, some really weird stuff would happen. And there were times where I had dreams. There were times where I had visions. There was times where things got said. And I woke up and I'm like, yep, nope. I'm not going to even share that with another human being, because they're either going to lock me up in, a rubber room, or they're going to burn me at the stake. One of the two, right? Lost friends, lost Christian friends, lost all kinds of things just from the point of view of, my gosh, I don't know about you guys, but one of my most sentimental things that I lost was Christmas. I lost it because it's just ruined. It's ruined. There is no Christmas sentiment left in me. It's destroyed by all the truth of what it really is. That may not be true for you, and I don't really care. And I'm going to tell you why, because this is my walk, right? But as the director of this ministry, this is my ministry in that way. My responsibility is what I mean, not ownership as in it's not anybody else's, because it's y'all's, right? It's anybody who is actually involved in this ministry. But what I want you to understand is it is my responsibility to make sure that I give you guys the best that I can give you. Well, I can tell you one of the ways in which that happens is not too long after I began to have these experiences and say, I'm not going to repeat these things, I had a revelation. The congregation I was in had gotten, this was a Messianic congregation, by the way. The congregation I was in had given me a task. They wanted me to teach about the bride. Now, there's some things you need to know. First of all, is that it is really easy for an individual to identify themselves as the bride of Christ. They'll say, oh yeah, we're the bride of Christ all day long. It is very hard to get an individual to say they're a son of God, to say that they are an Elohim, to say that they are B'nai Elohim. Okay? It's hard. It's very difficult. And I'm no exception. I had my fair share of not wanting him to be a father because I didn't have any good references for a father. I had no frame of references that said fathers are good. I had all bad fathers, no matter. It was whether I had friends, whether I had my own father, his father, myself as a father, horrible humans, right? Okay. Fathers are just horrible humans. That was my sentiment. And so when I talk about the easiness of making up a message about the bride, I was doing good, right? Okay, we're just going to go get this Strong's Concordance number, and it's about the bride, and we're going to talk a little bit about the chuppah, and we're going to talk a little bit about the crushing of the glass, and right. The woman on the chair. This is easy stuff. Well, uh, what happened was I saw something happen in the Hebrew, and I'm just going to show it to you really quick, okay? Actually, so basically, in the process of my journey in this lesson that I was writing, I had this word. Okay, let's see. This word. Let's do yellow for the Hebrew, orange for the fat marker, and let's do uh, pink for the thin marker. Sounds good. Okay. So what I had is I had this word right here, which means to be able or to be willing or to be willful. And I had this letter. Okay, I'm just going to put a dash here. And then I had this word right here, which meant to be a vessel. Now, let's jump back over here for a minute so you don't get distracted. I went to a very liberal college, okay? And when I say liberal, all I'm saying is that it was definitely more on the side of democracy than it was on the side of republic. And one of the biggest things that occurred in that college was a push for sociology, right? Which, of course, we know Karl Marx founded. And of course, I shined in this subject because I was a people person. I watched people. I observed behavior, not only on a microcosmic, but a macrocosmic level. What do I mean by that? I mean, I watched the soul, but I also saw the soul of a society, right? So in that process, obviously, I learned critical race theory. I learned progressivism. I learned many, many things that basically kind of put me in a position where equality became a factor of reality for me. I demanded equality, equal treatment of all peoples in all nations and all races and all sexual orientations and all of these different things. Now, I can tell you at that time, I was still working on the whole fundamentalist Christian type of a process. I was working on the Calvinist type of process, and I did not realize really, because I was just kind of ignorant to the whole political scene, did not realize the college I was going to. But in that process, gender equality became a must in my thought process. As I looked at things like, for example, the T-shirt factory that kind of started the women's lib movement, and all of the things that have gone into feminine rights, women in the workplace, the whole idea of sexual harassment and all these other things, which were just these injustices for me, and I zealously grabbed a hold of them. An area in the Bible that became very difficult is when Paul said, women are the weaker vessel. No, when Peter said, women are the weaker vessel. And when Paul said, I shall not suffer a woman to speak in the synagogue, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So there was a cognitive dissonance that occurred. Now, what's important about this whole thing is I was trying to understand the word bride, which I'm going to give to you in a minute. Now, I had just began my journey in the ancient pictographic Hebrew. And I can tell you, I have had major confirmations about this message this week. We will not be talking about the parasha today. And interestingly enough, the scroll camera broke last week. Meaning what? Meaning we do not have a way to look at the scroll right now until we get a new camera. that for me was an indicator that we might not be talking about the parasha, and I was right. This message is about the bride. But I want to show you the journey that God brought me on. And after I do, then I'll share with you some of the things that I have learned since then and helping you understand this. But the weaker vessel thing drove me crazy. It was frustrating, and I had a hard time reconciling my faith to my political views. Okay, so when we talk about equality, there's a couple things that are very important. There is a very big difference between rights violations and preference, okay? But there is also a difference between rights violations and religious tenets. There are a number of religions out there, most of them Abrahamic, that seem to really suppress the woman, that seem to really treat the woman with contempt or misogyny, right? And I really had a problem with that. And I was trying to figure out how to reconcile these things. But there was a point in time, and there was a instance that occurred in which I needed to preach about the bride. Well, what do we know about the bride of Christ? What are some of the expectations of the bride of Christ? In fact, the name of the teaching was the expectations of the bride. Okay. In other words, what's expected of the bride? Because we're the bride. What do we need to do? What is it? And I'm telling you, when I began this journey, I was, as I said, had these political views, had these issues with the scripture. And as I began this journey, I knew that I could not just go in there and parrot. This would have been my first teaching since the snot bubbles. When I started to figure these things out, I decided that the best way would be to go to the word bride in the book of Revelation, because that's the one place where we get the bride of Christ, right? That's where we get a straight up marriage supper of the Lamb, and his bride has made herself ready, right? Revelations 19, 7 and 8. So let's go there for a moment. And I will take you on this journey, and I will help you see what I saw, okay? Now, I can tell you there's an element of coincidence. There's an element of randomness to this, but believe you me, by the time this is done, you're going to be like, okay? I'm telling you, the season of renewing is upon us. Whether it be the idea of renewing in the sense of Paul saying to renew your mind, or whether it be this sentiment of what's happening because it's winter time and the renewing that's occurring, in which everything is preparing to come into resurrection. As we move into the spring, we will see the resurrection of the trees, the resurrection of the grass, the plants, the flowers, right? How much more the resurrection of our Messiah, etc. Okay? So in that process, I need you to understand that I believe that there is sentiments and there is zeal present in the current political views and stances, etc., of both genders, whether it be male or female, concerning these issues. And I'm hoping that through my testimony, I can clarify some things on why I believe what I believe, but I can also show you the path that I believe he took me down to give to you. Okay? Because now we're on YouTube, we're worldwide. The world now has the opportunity to see this message. And it's important enough that I believe I probably will go download it and edit it and then post it back up and delete this actual live recording. We'll see how that goes. But here is the deal. We're going to go into the book of Revelation, and we are going to be in chapter 19. Now, I know that in times past, I've told you that God has forbidden me from studying the book of Revelation. And I know why he has. I know the reason why he has is because I have preconceived notions about what that book is, what's expected of that book, what the symbols are. I have already a bunch of biases. And so it's almost like he has to teach me something new before I actually encounter Revelation. But there is one area of Revelation I'm going to share with you today. And that, of course, is Revelation chapter 19, going into verse 7 and verse 8. So let us be glad and rejoice, and let us give honor to him. For the time has come for the wedding feast of the Lamb, and his bride has prepared herself. She has been given the finest of pure white linen to wear, for the fine linen represents the good deeds of God's holy people. Okay. So there's a lot that goes into this, right? And we could really get into the nitty-gritty of what is a good deed, et cetera, et cetera. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past, right? But in general, all I want is that word bride right now, okay? So getting in, and you got to remember, at this time, let me talk about that for a moment. So at this time in my past, I had a lot of Christian sentiments and biases and fundamental things still present, right? So when I read this, I know the bride is the church replaced Israel, blah, 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 right? That's the premise, right? But the, in my heart of hearts, I knew that there were things that I needed to change in my thinking. So I always referenced the New Testament first. And the reason I did is because I believed that the New Testament overrode the Old Testament. That's what I believed at that time. Okay. All right. So at any rate, so then if we go and we look at the word bride, okay, that is the key here. The marriage of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. This is the word gune, or gyne, depending on how you read it. But it is the word for woman of any age, whether a virgin or married or a widow, and secondary is a wife, right? But we see it used 221 times in King James Version of the Bible, okay? But when we get into the actual word bride, then we start to get into the Hebrew word right here, right? Eshet, which comes from Isha, right? Which is wife or bride. But interestingly enough, that's actually not the word that is used for bride. Okay, so if I was to go to say if I was to go to search the word bride out, and we were to go look for it in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, then we could see where this gyne is used, or this gune, rather, gune. Okay. So the way in which this works, let me just show you this, is that basically I'm going to go down to the usages, but I'm going to click right here. Okay. And when I click here, what it's going to do is it's going to jump to the Septuagint references. So if I jump to the Septuagint references, then of course we have what? We have, then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. That's the first usage of the word gyne. Okay. Or gune. And there's not a whole lot that we can necessarily find in the first few chapters of Genesis for that word bride. Okay. And so the word wife is usually Isha, but bride is a certain circumstance. And here's the part that's so important about this. A wife is not a bride. Okay? A wife is not a bride. A bride happens only one time in the history of a woman. She has her time in which she is a virgin. There is a time in which she is the bride, and there is a time in which she is the wife. What is the difference between those three has to do with one simple fact. For one moment in time, and let's picture the entire eternity of existence of all things, only one moment in time is the bride of the Lamb, right? This is the marriage supper of the Lamb, and his bride has made herself ready. Bride is when she presents herself as ready for matrimony, ready for the wedding, presents herself as the bride. Once the marriage has occurred and the marriage is consummated, she is the wife. The word for wife is isha, okay? But the word for bride is a very different word. So the way that we're going to do this, even though that I had to use Strong's Concordance, we didn't have the Blue Letter Bible app back then. I had to use Strong's Concordances and Brown Driver Briggs and the Britons and try to find scriptural references, the Thayer's Dictionary, to find scriptural references for the word bride. Okay. So let me show you how this works. I'm just going to cheat and I'm just going to type in the word bride. Okay. Bride. And we will just start with the first usage. We'll just jump to the first usage. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to anyone and has sex with her, he must pay the customary bride price and marry her. Let's go see if that's our word. And it is not. Okay. So then we'll have to keep going here. You will see. You will see why this is so important. Bride price. So we're probably not going to use the word bride price. As a bride returns to her husband. Let's take a look here. Let's take a look here. And we have I don't see that actually being in there either. The word bride. Well, let's change it to the King James Version, since that is the actual Blue Letter Bible, or I'm sorry, that is the actual Strong's Concordance concordant. How the how James Strong concorded his compendium, in which you're able to search out these words. Oh, great, it died. And this is really actually really relevant. So, don't necessarily, I would say this is probably one where you really want to pay attention. I'm going to do my best not to lose you. There we go. As a bride. So we're going to go with Isaiah chapter 49, verse 18. And that's where we're getting the word bride. Now, this is what I want you to see. Now, remember, I don't know much, right? At this time, I have a bunch of Christian sentiments, and I'm trying to understand all of this stuff. And what has happened is I have found myself at the Strong's Concordance level, right? The lexical root, as it were, which I'll show you that again in a minute. But the premise is that basically what I have going on is I have this idea that the bride is a presentation of the woman at the marriage ceremony. The woman herself is a woman, and usually, and in this case for sure, a virgin until that moment in which the consummation occurs. Once the consummation occurs, we don't see her being referenced as a bride. We see her being referenced as an isha, as a wife. Okay. The word in Hebrew for female is necheva. The word in Hebrew for bride for wife or woman is isha. But the word in Hebrew for bride is kalala. And actually, we'll say kal la, not kalala. Which the way that I could explain this is there's two lameds, but you pronounce the first part kal and the second part la with no no vowel in between. So it's kalla, okay? And you put emphasis on the last syllable, kalla, okay? Kalla. All right. So a kalla is basically this woman being presented at this time of marriage, not the consummation part, but the presentation part, right? The presentation part, what you see, or a demonstration of what? Of traditional clothing, of action, right? There's symbols that play a role, the ketubah, the wine, right? The ketubah being what? The covenant, the wine, right? All of those things. Now, if we get into the more Jewish wedding, we've got the crushing of the glass, we've got the chuppah, all that kind of stuff. Okay, but the key here is what the bride is. Okay, and when we're dealing with the word bride, what we have to do is go beyond the Strong's Concordance. So, getting back into our text, we have kalla, right? Kalla. And that is the Hebrew word being used for bride. Now, if you look at the word bride in this way, that's as far as we're going to get. We're going to understand that it is excuse me, a presentation, right? But let's go back into the ancient pictographic Hebrew and see what the ancients, because let me just remind you of something. So last week, I taught a message about, hey, these guys may have had it more together than us, because here they are drawing these pictographs that they knew nothing about science. Now, Solomon did say what? That there's nothing new under the sun. Whatever was is what will be. And so they may have had the knowledge that we have now. But regardless, they're writing on pottery. We're not writing on pottery today. We're writing on paper. We're writing on compressed wood chips instead of upon compressed reed, right? We're not writing on papyri. We're not writing on leather. We're not writing on pottery. But they were writing on pottery. And interestingly enough, pottery seems to last longer than paper. Maybe it would behoove us to write on plastic, because that's never going away. But the point is that something comes from the past and testifies against us. And that is that these ancient mystics, these people who had a relationship with God, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had a relationship with Yahweh Elohim. They inscribed on these pottery shards mysteries through pictures. And in a minute, I'm going to show you how cool that picture set actually is. We're going to get into that. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to show you, just for a moment, what the ancients saw in the word bride. And please understand that it is very easy to step into the possibility that the Bible is just a historical document, and that Hebrews chapter 12, verse 4, where it says the word of God is, or maybe it's 4, verse 12, the word of God is living and, powerful. And so we can accept that as an ancient historical document, or we can accept that it is actually the living word of God, living, breathing, existing word of God. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to jump into the ancient pictographic. Now, remember what my political sentiments were at the time when I was writing this message. Remember that I probably was a poster child for the DNC. Okay, so I'm going to take you back over here, and we are going to go ahead and copy, and we'll just bring in the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, written by Jeff Benner, and I'm just going to post the Strong's Concordance number there, and then I'm going to remove the H because obviously we're only dealing with the Hebrew and in the lexicon. And then we come up with our word. And our word is Kaf Lamed. Notice the pink. Kaf Lamed Hey, which is a daughter-in-law or the wife of one's son. The bride of the son, as brought into the camp in the sense of making the man complete. Oh boy, there's a lot there, isn't there? So then what we need to do first, and please understand, when I was doing this research, I was doing this research in the book, okay? In the actual book, not a digital copy of the book where I can just go like this, and I can go back to the ancient pictographic root, Kof Lamed. Look at the blue. The pictograph, Kof, is a picture of the bent palm representing the bending or subduing of the will. The lamed is a picture of a shepherd's staff or yoke. Combine these mean tame for the yoke. Oh boy. Oh boy. Time for a paradigm change, right? Here's my political view. Here's these ancient peoples making this thing. So I can either do one of two things. I can either say that the Bible is a historical document and they were a misogynistic people, or I can accept that there's some sort of spiritual connection, and for me, my own personal private experience of the Bible, my own personal private experience with what some people like to call Sky Daddy. The intensification of all power in the universe has been an intimate and very spiritually oriented, where I have an unction of truth, right? I have an unction of truth concerning it. I feel and I bear witness, and I bear witness to the cosmos, that I believe it to be an actual document that is legitimately presented to me from the intensification of all power in the universe, and not just an ancient peoples who prevailed in such a way to create a bigger religion and a bigger religion and a bigger religion, right? Where we have kind of the evolution of the Abrahamic religions kind of stopping or finalizing itself in Islam. But we have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Christianity is right in the middle, and it's huge. It's humongous. Not quite as big per se as Islam was, and as it continues to grow again, it's starting to head in that direction. But in general, one of the things we can safely say is that Christianity got big, right? Christianity got big. And that comes from these ancient peoples who are supposedly misogynistic, baby killers, etc., right? That's my mentality. My thinking about this is there's parts of the Bible I just can't handle. I'm like, this is not okay. You can't do this to a people. Because why? Because I'm this revolutionary Western social democratic guy, right? Okay. So the reason why that is important is because here we go with tame for the yoke as the parent root for bride. It was not a good day for me. Okay, so at any rate, I began to take notes and start to write this down. I have Kof, Lamed, Hey, right? Okay, but the parent root is what? It is Kof Lamed, right here, okay? Which is what? Tame for the yoke. Tame for the yoke. Okay, fine. So let's say that I just go ahead and I operate with an open mind, because why? Because I've been wrong about so many things since that moment in which I was told, I learned that Yeshua actually resurrected on the Shabbat. Okay, so I have an obligation now, right? I'm supposed to tell these people this. But in my good conscience, I can't do that. So I'm asking God to reconcile this. Help me, teach me, show me what it is. So what do I got to do? Well, first of all, as a person who studied law, I got my, it's one of those things where you see the DeVry commercial and you want to get a certification in something. And so I tried computer repair, I tried paralegal, I tried many things, right? Automotive repair. Nothing really sat well, because why? I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. I study a subject and learn it in order to teach somebody else it. And so it didn't matter what subject I learned. That wasn't my niche. My niche was teaching it. At any rate, so as a paralegal, I learned that one of the things that the Supreme Court does when a matter of law is brought before them in an appeal is they review the law, what we call de novo, in which they exhaustively try to see what the legislative intent was, what the intention behind the act was. That's the legislative intent. What were the arguments? What were the arguments for the act? What did the one side of the aisle say? What did the other side of the aisle say, to try to determine what that law really, how it should have been interpreted? And then they go and they see how judges have interpreted it. They go and they look at case law and they say, okay, well, a judge interpreted this way, but that doesn't necessarily match our case, etc. Right? But what that requires is to pull in context of the entire law. Well, that's the same with scripture. You should do this often, okay? And so as a person who knew how to review law de novo, I went ahead, and because obviously if you're going to write a legal argument, which is what paralegals do, they write a legal argument, the lawyer reads it, likes it, signs it, and next thing you know, lawyer's making, upwards of $10,000 a month, and the paralegal's making $8 an hour. So anyways, the point being is, so tame for the yoke, right? That's where we're at, tame for the yoke. But I want to know the context, right? Because are we talking about that we were supposed to throw a yoke upon a woman and lead her around on a collar, right? Is that where this is going, right? I mean, I was pretty reactive, but I began to read, and what I read was interesting. So it says, an animal or land that is tamed has been worked and is complete, ready for use. Oh, wow. There was a moment I was like, ooh, that actually sounds really good. Taming, because why? The bride has made herself ready, right? Taming includes construction of holding pens, putting the soil to the plow, harvesting of crops, milk or meat. One eats once the harvest is complete. Okay, so this word kind of means complete. And interestingly enough, if you go into the book, and I'm just going to give you your page number real quick here. It is actually, I believe, page 146 is where that word, yeah. So 146 is actually where we get the action of complete, the concrete of the word vessel, and the abstract of being whole. Oh my gosh. So listen, when we're talking about this, you got to understand, I didn't know these things, right? I'm just reading this and I'm going, oh, wow, this is starting to get really amazing, right? At first, I was very reactive to tame for the yoke. But now I'm realizing that this is one of those abstract things, right? So our first Hebrew word, kaf lamed hey, means what? Complete. The word bride means complete. Okay? But here's the thing. Remember, all I have is this. I don't have the digital copy. I'm not able to do searches or anything like that. So if I'm going to go to page 146, all I'm going to get if I go to page 146, is action complete. Okay, so then we got to talk about action in a minute. But the concrete is vessel. We'll get to that. But then the abstract is wholeness or whole. Okay, so let's talk a minute about how this works. First of all, okay, when we are dealing with the idea of vessel, and remember, this is one of the greatest lessons that God ever brought me through. When we're dealing with the idea of vessel, there is an element of emptiness, not wholeness. Okay, I will illustrate for you. Let me show you. Okay, so remember, we have our Hebrew word, and I'm just going to write it over here as kof lamed hey. Okay, and we're going to label all these. So this is what? This is will or able, right? This is vessel. And this is what? Bride. And this is also what? Complete. Complete. Okay. So I'm like, all right, I honestly there's some things here that I don't understand. Yeah, I need to get my mind wrapped around why does will and vessel and bride have something to do with each other? Okay. So then let's talk a minute about Peter. Peter, according to any Christian theologian, was a confused Jew. How do we know? Because he had this little conflict with Rabbi Shaul, Paul, right? When people from Jerusalem comes in and he has this time of weakness in his strong mind in which he engages in separatism between Gentiles and Jews, because that's how those Jews who came from Jerusalem or from James, who James, the leader of the what? The council, right? He has this moment. And so all of the entire context of Peter is thrown into two verses. One, arise, Peter, kill and eat. And he says, not so, Lord, I have never eaten anything unclean or common. We're not going to get into the rest of that. You guys know how that whole discussion went. But he says, not so. And so what? Christian theologians say, Peter was a little confused. It took a while for him to let go of the law. Okay, I'm not going to go there. But the premise is that now all of a sudden Peter writes these letters late in life. So he was obviously confused for his whole life, because why? He says what? He says in Peter, in one of his letters, right? We'll go ahead and go there because I think it's probably important to put it up on the screen so that people can get bent out of shape. It is going to actually be in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. And I'm reading out of the King James. Why am I reading out of the King James? Because I want you to hear how it was interpreted in 1611. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without a word be won by the conversation of the wives. And what? While they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair and the wearing of gold or the putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, right? In that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in old times, the holy women also who trusted God adorned themselves, being in subjection to their own husbands. Oh my gosh, what a mess this is in my political brain. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Oh my gosh. Whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. Likewise, ye husbands, oh, here we go. Dwell with them according to the knowledge, given honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. Okay, so I understood that God was changing my brain. I understood that he was making adjustments and that he was helping me understand something that I could not understand because why? Because I had a lot of biases, whether they were Christian, whether they were liberal, etc. Okay, but when we go to the word weaker vessel, it is the word skeos, I'm sorry, skeuos, and it means a vessel. But now watch this. Ba-bum. Y'all see that? It's used in the Septuagint. What is the Septuagint? It's the Greek Old Testament translated from Hebrew to represent the word kali. Let's go back to the board for a minute. And here is our word kali, right? It's in my list. It's in my context of this this Hebrew parent root kof lamed, which is of course it's the poem. Let's see, where's my so it is this, right? It is the shepherd's crook, and it is the palm of the hand drawn like that on pottery, right? And we have what? Tame. Actually, let's do that in a different color. Tame for the yoke. Okay, so maybe I don't completely understand this, right? Maybe in my heart, I have a bad understanding of the word yoke, right? I mean, that's what's kind of going through my mind as I'm reading this stuff, because obviously we get back to the word complete and the word bride kind of meaning the same thing. And it clearly says it says in the definition that she completes the man, right? The completion of the man. But again, I'm struggling with this whole gender inequality thing that seems to be present in scripture. All right. So then I finally said, okay, I need to read through the context and find all these things, because it seems to me that there's some sort of transition here, right? There's some sort of process by which we go from this to this to this. There was something missing, okay? And it really bothered me when I researched this. I looked this up in the Brown Drivers Briggs. I looked it up in all these different lexicons, and I could not find, because I was very interested in this permutation where we have the yod transitioning to this side, and we have the yod being here instead of here. This meaning willfulness, or the ability to do something, and this meaning vessel, which interestingly enough had my attention, because obviously willfulness would not be a weaker vessel submitting to a husband, and that was the point of my teaching in the first place. Okay. So I got really, really, really sleepy. And I began to have this moment in which I said, I can't figure this out. I'm getting frustrated. this teaching is not flowing the way I'd like to. I had my points, my talking points, which I don't do anymore. I had my stuff written down. It was just not making sense. So it's time to go to sleep. And so I turned the radio on. I laid my head down. I'm listening to Caleb, trying to change the word Jesus to Yeshua in my head for these songs, and fell asleep. And there was this moment in which I woke up and it was clear to me. And I thought it was ridiculous. Remember, I had searched the Brown Driver Briggs, the Brentons, the Gesenius. I had searched all the lexicons trying to find this permutation. It wasn't there. This is exactly how it went. In my sleep, it said, look for the permutation in the ancient Hebrew lexicon. I woke up. I said, this is stupid. It can't be this easy. I'm not going to sit here and believe that that's exactly what is going on. That I actually can't find it in any of these. I can't find it anywhere in Scripture. I can't find it anywhere in any of the information that I have going on. Why is there not where's this word? Okay. I didn't know anything about the Neum. I didn't know anything about the idea of God speaking to you while you are in between asleep and awake. But it was so clear. This rabbi had come up to me in my dream, had opened the scroll and pointed to the word. And he said, go look up the word. And as I woke up, I knew I was supposed to look it up in the lexicon, but it wasn't in any of the lexicons that I had already looked at. So I was a little bit discouraged. But you know what? There's this point in time with God where I say, look, I don't know whether this is going to piss you off or not, and I don't know whether you're the one speaking, and I don't want to go outside of your will. You guys know this drill. I don't want to go outside your will. So if it be your will, can you help me out here? You know, you get the point. All right. So getting back to the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, we were on page 146 for our root, our parent root, which was what? The action was complete, the vessel was abstract, or I'm sorry, the concrete was vessel and the abstract was whole, right? Okay. Page 148, last entry, M. One who is held in prison. Kof Yod Lamed. Now, there was this moment where I was like, this is getting worse, right? We've got yokes, we've got prison, we've got we've got a vessel. This is not going well. So we'll add our word, and I'm going to label it a very specific way. So it is Kof Yod Lamed, and it means captive. All right, so we're going to undistract ourselves from behind me for a second. You have the yod on the right hand, modifying tame for the yoke. This is what I want you to think about. The yod itself means to work or do, okay? And so there's this premise where there is this carefreeness of the do, augmenting the parent root. What is the parent root? The parent root is kof lamed, tame for the yoke. So we have this action, this yod being on the right hand, right? What is the right hand? It is the position of honor, right? But that's not the Hebrew word for bride. That's the Hebrew word for willpower or ability or being able. Yachal. Yachal means in modern Hebrew to be able. But here's this yod augmenting the parent root, right? And the yod augmenting the parent root is saying do tame for the yoke, almost as if to say do something, right? And then tame for the yoke, as if tame for the yoke is not acceptable to the doer. In other words, they're going to do instead of becoming tame. Now, bear with me, because remember what my mindset was. See, the problem is that if you hear me teach this without giving you the insight that was happening at the time, you're going to be ticked at me, right? You're going to react. But if you listen to me when I say my brain would not let this be what it was becoming, you need to understand what I was going through at those moments. So now we have this and, or this yod, right? In fact, let me illustrate that just for a moment, real quick here. Let's jump back into our whiteboard and let's add another page. And let's just put our word yachal up here, okay? And so what we have is we have our parent root right here, right? We have our parent root right there. We have our letter augmenting, and we know that this means tame for the yoke, right? We know that this, we know that this is tame, right? And we know that this is do. And it's almost as if there is this idea that the yod is actually working against the kof lamed. Now, I know that there's a possibility that we could say, wait a minute now, the yod is in the right hand, and so it's in the place of honor, and so it's obviously operating as the augmenter, right? And I've taught you guys that anything that is sitting in the right hand spot is the place of honor, and therefore receives the double portion, receives the inheritance of the family business of the clan, etc. Right? This is something moving into authority, right? I didn't mean to write a Q there. Okay, so in all that thought process, what we have going on here is this ideal that this is a drawing of a hand, right? That's what it looks like in the ancient pictographic Hebrew. So in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, the word for being able or willful, right, which means basically doing whatever you want, is actually the drawing of a hand, a palm, and a shepherd's crook. So this whole idea of willfulness, of this idea of kind of moving away from subjection, appealed to me, right? This is the rebel. This is the one who refuses to conform. This is the one who refuses to be be put under subjection. This is the one who refuses to have the chain. This is the one who refused it, right? We could say this is the liberated one. This is the one who has come out of a horrible relationship and refuses to be involved in that type of thing again, right? This is the man who finally steps free from an addiction, right? This is the free one. This is the liberated one, right? Okay. And so the premise is that what we have then is we have this carefree woman, right? We have this liberated one who is not going to put themselves under a yoke, who has put off tyranny, who has become free and able to not have to be conformed, not have to be put into subjection, right? She's free. She's able, right? She's capable on her own, and she's alone in the cosmos, right? Okay. So when we are dealing with her, we have a tendency to think this is great. This is perfect. This is what is needed, right? This is this whole idea of liberation from the law. This is this whole idea of Galatians 5:1. Stand therefore in the liberty of Christ, which of course the church has interpreted as throwing off the yoke of the law, right? Throwing off the oppression of the Torah. And we see the bride liberated, right? She has replaced Israel, who was subject to this law. And so she has now become this carefree person who dances and who enjoys life and smells the flowers, and everything's wonderful. Because why? Because there has come a salvation. There has come a redemption. There's come a change in status by the Messiah. And everything's great and all hunky-dory until Goofy Paul and Peter come along and John the Revelator. Because all of a sudden everything gets all weird once we start getting into the idea of her being a bride. Right now she's this carefree virgin, right, who has not known a man. She has not known the subjection of a wife, etc., etc. Well, it's interesting because I had this experience not long before this, and you need to remember what was one of the bigger things that I had encountered at that time was that all of my doctrines and all of my mess had just been thrown out. I was trying to find my own path to the intensification of all power in the universe and was not accepting tenets or doctrines or heresies or anything else that, I mean, if the Catholic Church labeled somebody a heretic, I went and studied them just to see if maybe that was some sort of inappropriate thing that had occurred and they had the truth. So as I began to move in this direction of saying, okay, this is perfect. She's willful. She is able to do her own thing. She doesn't have to listen to anybody, doesn't have to answer to anybody. This is perfect, right? I love this. This is exactly the sentiment and the understanding that I have of a Christian, right? They're no longer under the law. And remember, by that time, I'm not accepting that, but that thought process was they're no longer subject to the death of the law, blah, 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 right? There's a total evolution that had occurred there, but I still had those biases in that thought process. So the next thing that is important in this story is what happened at a Passover prior. So I was coming into Passover and I felt like, and you need to understand, Easter for me was big. Like if Christmas was big, Easter was bigger, right? In my thought process. And in my mind, having read the letters from Constantine to the Council of Nicaea and all those things, I had concluded that there was a total liberation that occurred in Nicaea, and when the Easter holiday was put into effect as a Christian tenet, right? And it was big for me. I mean, like the idea of being able to mourn that someone died for me was just, oh my gosh, there was something to that. Then I had my script flipped. And when I had my script flipped, all of a sudden I couldn't celebrate Easter anymore when I found out that the kid that found the egg was the one who was sacrificed. That way they wouldn't have to worry about whether it was one of the corrupt officials' children or whatever. Somebody had figured out a way to get around the corruption. And I said, okay, whatever. I can't do Easter anymore. But Passover still has Yeshua dying and resurrecting in it. It's built into the holiday. First fruits, unleavened bread, and Passover all contain Passion Week, right? Okay. And so as I was getting ready for Passover in my mind, I felt like maybe I needed to kind of cleanse myself the way that I had cleansed myself in Easter's past, where I fast on Good Friday and I subject myself to a form of death on Saturday, and then on Sunday morning I get up and I'm joyful and I'm excited, and he is risen indeed, right? And I decided to shave my head. Now, at that time, I had more hair. Shave my head, shave myself to present myself as pure. Well, interestingly enough, as that was going on, the day that I had done that, I basically kind of had studied it out and had encountered that there was a cutting of hair of the captive bride. Remember, I'm very good at being the bride, right? I don't want to be the son, but I definitely want to be the bride. I want to definitely be subject to God, the will of God, right? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? And I'm big on Book of Revelation. I'm an eschatologist. I love prophecy, right, at this time. And so the idea that the captive bride who's brought in, and remember, anything that had the word bride in it, I'm immediately going to equate to Revelation chapter 19, right? So anything in the Old Testament, right, in my mind has to do, if the word bride is mentioned, it has to do with the bride of Christ. And so we see this story of how you go to war and you take this woman captive, and then you bring her home, and she is to mourn her people for 30 days. And what? And shave her head and cut her nails. And then after that, you can what? Go into her, and she will become your wife. In the meantime, she's the captive bride. So I already knew this concept, right? I already understood this concept of the captive bride. So as I am starting to look at this understanding, I am finding myself in a state of going, holy smokes. I have this dream of this rabbi coming up, open the scroll, and it says, Kof Yod Lamed. That was not in any of the lexicons. I had searched for it, right? And as I'm waking up, God says, go look in the ancient Hebrew lexicon. And I'm like, I ain't doing that. Well, there we go. On page 148, there it is. Anybody who has that lexicon can go look now and see the last word, the entry number or entry letter M is Kof Yod Lamed, which is what? A captive. It says a villain in prison, but the actual understanding of it is that idea of a captive, as somebody who's been taken captive. Okay. So as I am looking at this, I'm going, oh my gosh, this makes sense now, right? Spirit of the Lord is upon me, right? Because he has given me the authority to preach good news, to lead captivity captive. He goes and he captures the bride out of the nations, and she has an opportunity to mourn her loss, because what's about to happen? She is about to go from a prisoner whose will is no longer her own to something else. And so as I looked at this journey, I found myself in the information right in front of us. This word, captive. And yet what has happened? The yod is moved, is no longer in the position of honor. It's no longer free. It's no longer willful. It has what? Come between the Kof and the Lamed, which was what? Tame, yod, yoke. Right? Tame, yod, yoke. Or what? that she is becoming tame, right? She's becoming tame. And so there's this moment in which she now has become the captive bride. And she spends this 30 days doing what? Making herself ready. She's what? The king goes into an enemy nation and finds a bride for himself and brings her home and puts her in a position to prepare herself. He's not just going to go into her, which if you look at the conquests of the nations like Genghis Khan, the Huns, etc., you will find that there was no waiting period for captive women. Okay? Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, my brain is having to make this adjustment and accept this because why? Because some stupid rabbi came to me in a dream and opened a scroll and showed me this. Now, somebody might say, oh, that was demonic. Okay, whatever. Anyways, so God tells me to look it up in the lexicon. I look it up in the lexicon, and here we are, this captive. And now I'm going, okay, that's the captive bride. This makes sense because why? Because Deuteronomy chapter 21, I believe it is, does not make any sense otherwise. Why would he allow a man to go into a nation and take a woman and bring her back as a slave and force her to become his wife? There had to be a greater understanding because my liberal mind couldn't handle it. And remember, he's flipping the script on me. So there's somewhere where I'm going to have to what? I'm going to have to come into subjection. And all of a sudden I realized that I was captive in this. He was forcing me to change my mind on this. And so as this evolution is coming, as I'm writing this, and now it's like what? 2 hours before I have to speak, right? And I'm going, oh boy, I don't know if I can do this, right? This is not working out. What's this last minute stuff? Well, needless to say, I got used to the last minute stuff. He has literally hit me with a message before 5 minutes before it was time to speak. And I didn't even know what I was going to say. So as I'm going through this, I'm going, man, I can't reconcile this, that we're going to just go and take a woman and put some handcuffs on her, and now she's going to be subject. And then I had this idea, I had this illustration in my brain, literally, of her being on the right hand, her hand being free. Who knows what this one's doing? I couldn't figure that one out. Her hands being free, and her what? Being able to do whatever she wants, to be willful, right? And then what? Captive. But that's not where it stops, does it? No, because there's another Hebrew word, as if it was just waiting for me to get this first part of this revelation that was so important. What happens next? What happens next? The vessel. Kof, lamed, tame for the yoke. If the yod is on the left and the tame for the yoke is on the right, meaning what? In the position of honor, it becomes the word vessel. This is not okay. Like all of a sudden, we are dealing with some crazy stuff. Why? Because this is what Peter said your wife is, a weaker vessel. Remember the transition from the Greek to the Hebrew? Kof, lamed, yod, keli. Keli, a vessel. Okay, let's talk about a vessel. What is a vessel? Well, the best way to illustrate a vessel is to just draw a glass. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go green, and we will draw a glass. Okay, and then to draw what? A pitcher. Okay, that's not a pitcher. right? To draw a picture. And what's in that picture? Water, right? So we have an empty vessel. There's so much involved here. What's the first thing right off the bat? Potential, right? There is in this glass right now emptiness. Emptiness. Whoa, emptiness. Let's talk a minute. Let's talk a minute about emptiness. What's empty in a woman before the consummation of the marriage? Her womb. What's not empty after the consummation of the marriage? Ideally, her womb, right? There's that idea, and now you guys know where I get my vessel teaching. There's the idea of what? Of a vessel of reception, a vessel of inception, conception, and something new being created, a renewing, right? A new thing. So what is the womb? Potential, right? Okay. Now we're getting into this idea of this cosmic woman. Let's see, what was that? Was it page 2? We're getting this idea of this cosmic woman, but she now has what? She has become the captive bride. Let me get rid of this right here. It's not going to let me. But you can see in the background, she's got the crown. She's bowing before Yeshua, offering him the crown, right? I don't want the crown. I do not want the willpower anymore. Why? Because of what she's going to become. She's going to become the vessel, right? She's going to become the bride. She's going to become this holder of this new thing. So let's get back into our discussion about the vessel. In our discussion about the vessel, we have to understand that this space here is potential, okay? As there starts to be a change in that potential, then now there is a certain amount that is full and a certain amount that is still empty. Meaning what? There's still potential. God does not look at you as what? As how full you are or how empty you are, but instead of how much potential you have and how far you have come. Okay, so this is how far you have come, because it takes what? It takes a woman making a decision to trust her husband, to allow him to go into her, which means what? That is how far you have trusted. That's how far you have become the vessel. And in that process, eventually there is a point in time where it goes from being empty, right, to being full. Full, or what? Complete. You can't put any more in. But in order for there to be a vessel that is full, there had to have been a greater vessel. And that greater vessel had to then give to the lesser vessel, right? But remember, that's not the word bride. That's not the word bride. The word bride is the word complete. Kof, lamed, hey. So if we go from the yod to the hey, we go from empty to full, because completeness in the Hebrew mind was the full belly. The full belly. Right? And so there is this idea that whether it's a pregnancy or whether you've had a really good meal, the belly has become full. The potential is being fulfilled, as it were. The hunger is no longer present. The willfulness is no longer present. The emptiness is no longer present. Listen, when we talk about, and this is interesting, when we talk about the idea of a when we talk about the idea of a completeness and a fullness, we also understand that that means that there's no longer a longing. But look at Eve. Something was missing from her. She had something inside of her that was empty. You want my proof? Adam doesn't touch her until after the garden. But then there's more. Yahweh's promise to her is that she would have children. You say, wait a minute, that's a curse. No, it doesn't say curse. And Torah is very, very, very meticulous. When it says curse in chapter 2 or chapter 3, verse 15, and it says curse in chapter 3, verse 17, and it's talking about man and the snake, why doesn't it say curse when it says, I will increase your childbearing and the pain thereof, and your desire will be for your husband? The desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. There's that tame for the yoke again. Okay, so in that, now what we need to understand is there is a completion that occurs as we go from doing willfully to the doing being captive to now the tame for the yoke being at the right hand of honor and therefore augmenting the yod, and that becoming the vessel, which is the potential of the bride, right? What actually makes her ready is that moment between when she says, I accept the covenant, and they consummate the marriage, and that moment after they consummate the marriage. And so the completeness, kala, or actually kala, is literally the vessel coming into, and this is interesting, an existence. I'm going to show you what I mean. So getting back into our whiteboard, we'll do one more scene here. We're going to say our Hebrew word is going to be kof lamed hey. Okay, that's our Hebrew word for bride and also our Hebrew word for complete. Remember, the completion was the taming, right? Once the ox was tame and was able to pull the yoke, then we could do the plowing, which would tame the land, right? And then we would have crops. That was the potential of the land. The potential of the ox is to become tame to pull the yoke. So now we see purpose, right? Okay. And so the principle is then what we have is we have a kof lamed hey. Well, in order to really gain an understanding of the hey, we have to think in terms of the ancient pictographic Hebrew. Now, one of the things I need you to remember is that tame for the yoke is in the position of honor still, which means what? There is submission. Submission. Okay. And in that process, what we have is our ancient pictographic Hebrew of behold. Why is it important for the bride to have gone through what she is going through? Well, let's look at this more practically. Let's look at this from the point of view before we mess with behold. Let's look at this from the point of view of reality of what we are. Okay, when we say we are the church, right? It says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Upon this rock, I will build my church, right? We are the church. As individuals, we are in a state of what? Ego suppression, which results in a divine emanation of authority, energy, and eventually a corporate collective conscience. The same corporate collective conscience that was present in Genesis 11 that God had to confound is the same corporate collective conscience that you were capable of with the other people who are in this same mindset, but also in spiritual connection. They are the ones who have stepped into dominion and realized that God has given us dominion over this earth. They are the ones who have stepped into energy and have put off the old fears of metaphysics. They're the ones who have stepped into the higher mind, the higher consciousness, because that's what the disciples were doing when they were in one accord. All you got to do is go back and study the Greek, and it is clear it has nothing to do with agreement. Agreement is the least of their issues. But practically, we have the human suppressing the ego. There's the will. We come into subjection. What did Paul say? We are no longer slaves to sin, but slaves to righteousness. Into subjection. We come as a what? Weaker vessel of the intensification of all power in the universe, and also a vessel of reception, because we could never be as a vessel of inception to him. What do I mean by that? We can never give or add or put anything into the intensification of all power in the universe and actually cause him to be greater or stronger or more intense. Cause it to be greater, stronger, or more intense. The imperceivable God, the origin or source of all things, does not need your help, but wants to give to you. We know that. We know that we serve a benevolent God, not a malevolent one. He's passed the Epicurean test. And so as a result of that, now we're what? Subject to him. Is this so hard? Because of that word. Wives, be subject to your husbands. Why? Because it says you will win a husband who's out of order. Now we get to behold. Now we get to behold. Now we get to behold. Behold is what? To observe, to see, to become a witness of. The wife is bearing witness to the yoke. Who's what? Who may or may not be in order. But let's read that verse again. Let's read that verse again, because this is where things change. Okay? Let's go back to that verse and let's see what we got. And this thing keeps getting hooked on here. Likewise, ye husbands. Okay, let's do this. Let's go back and let's change this to the NLT so that we can see some of the okay. In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Then, even if some refuse to obey the good news, what's the good news? What's the gospel? Torah, right? How do we know that? Hebrews chapter 4, chapter 4, verse 3, where it says that they all heard it at Mount Sinai. What did they hear? They heard Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay, refuse to obey the good news or gospel. Your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Why? Because you will become the example. I am a man. I do not have bride anatomy. I do not have bride emotions. I do not have bride abilities. But I am expected to be a bride. Now, having said that, no, it doesn't say his brides have made themselves ready, whereas it definitely says in Romans chapter 8, we are sons of God, okay, which is a task very difficult for a bride to be if she's a female and is a emanation of the feminine attributes of God. Just as hard as it is for me as a man to be what? In that state. I have to see, I have to learn and observe. We are creatures who learn from context-sensitive memory triggers. I'm sorry, who operate off of context-sensitive memory triggers that we learned early on. Meaning what? When I observe it, then I will know how to do it. In other words, the woman, the Isha, who is made herself ready to become a Kala, is what? A speed limit sign, right? A direction, a trail marker on how I am supposed to be towards the intensification of all power in the universe as a corporate collective consciousness. Now, this is the part that's powerful. Until you come into private subjection of your own ego, you will not be able to be part of the corporate collective conscience, because that is the bride, and the bride has made herself ready. Do not lie to yourself. If you have not brought that ego into subjection, you are definitely not going to be demonstrating yourself as a bride. And the proof is in the fact that it says that her garments are the righteous acts of the saints, which consequently is the same word that's used in Romans chapter 8, verse 4, when it says that the righteous requirements of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. When we talk about spirit, we unfortunately are getting the King James word, ghost, right? Or spirit. And unfortunately, in the Greek, pneuma, or breath, right? That doesn't do us any good here. Because what? God has no lungs. There is no breath of God. He is not human. He doesn't breathe oxygen. And so when it says God breathed into the nostrils of Adam and he became a living being, those are symbols trying to tell you about what's going on with the energies. The intensification of all power in the universe is an energy with intelligence and intention. You need to accept that the anthropomorphic things that have been assigned, not only by him, but by humans, to him, hands, eyes, ears, are so that you understand that there's a perceivable understanding of our lives to it. But make no mistake, the source of all things is an imperceivable thing for us. It's too big. It's too vast, too powerful. And so it's dumbing down into a bride, a husband, a father, sons, not daughters, sons. Why? Because there plays a role and responsibility of the sons. There's a role of legacy. It says what? We are sons of God, or children of God. We are children of God and what? Heirs. And then it says that all creation has been waiting for the emanation of God through the sons of God. Okay, so if you could accept that subjection is not because you've been made some lesser thing, but that you are an example of what I, as a man, need to become to him in order to demonstrate that a divine wedding can occur. Because here's the part that's heavy duty, and this is the most important part of this whole thing. I mean, like when I was going through this, as I'm getting ready to preach this message, I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't think people are going to even get this, because I'm not going to tell them the testimony, right? I'm just going to teach the teaching. Okay, real simple. Bride's willful, alone, not doing what she was created to do. The bride is subject, right? The bride comes into subjection. The bride becomes the vessel, prepared for what? Prepared for a renewal, prepared for something new, potential, right? But what? Completely submitted to the yoke. And then what? And then she becomes what? The observer. The observer of what? A witness, someone ready to testify as to the righteousness of her husband. It makes sense now, right? The whole idea of the gospel of Christ, the whole idea of the good news. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so we might become the righteousness of God. I preach Christ and him crucified. It makes sense now. It makes sense that we become the witness of the intensification of all power in the universe, that he is not malevolent, but benevolent. But in that process, we have to do it by example. We have to demonstrate to other people that we're willing to trust him and let him do his thing, that we're willing to allow the Torah to be the will of God, and that we are to play within defense. There's plenty of playground equipment here in this sandbox. We don't need to go outside of it. Okay? But people want to be outside of that is because they are still willful, and they have not made themselves ready as the bride, who is what? The corporate collective conscience. If you need to understand Acts in its wholeness, you need to understand that there was a corporate collective consciousness. There were people spiritually, divinely connected to each other's brains. They did the same thing in Genesis 11, and God came down and confounded their language. He said, this is the intensification of all power in the universe, stuffed himself into God knows what, and came down here and observed the city, whether it was a human, a bird, who knows what it was. He observes the city and he says, they're all one. Echad, not Yachad, Echad. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing will be impossible for them. That is so powerful. That is so out there from what people understand of when we get into this idea of a woman being subject to a husband. It's not even remotely present in the brain of a person who is exploiting a woman, to realize that the woman is instinctually wanting to submit to the man so that he can learn how to submit to his God, but interestingly enough, is equal to him in rights and protections and all of those things, and is just the authority of the man who constantly on a regular basis is doubting whether or not he has that authority, is doubting whether or not he is capable of that authority. I'm ducking because, as I just told you guys, a man secret. I'm waiting for one of the snipers to take me out. We're terrified of authority. And so we need to learn how to have it. Therefore, you need to show us how to submit to him, yes, of course, but you need to show us how to have it. And so, as a man, I can preach this message real easy, right? Because I'm on the side of saying, here's God, here's authority, we need to do this, blah, blah, blah. But if I was to take the position of a woman, this would be a very, very difficult message to teach. But you need to know that as I was learning it, in my mind, it was not okay. But now I understand it better because I know I'm a vessel. Peter called himself a tent. I'm a vessel. And I am a vessel that has potential and has things that it's already accomplished, but I am not whole yet. I'm not complete. Paul said, I have not attained. Philippians was written after his arrest in Jerusalem. It was the only letter that was written after his arrest in Jerusalem. And he says, and so this is the end of his life. 2 years after the book of Acts, he is executed. Well, maybe it's 5 years. He was executed. His head's chopped off. But he says in Philippians, I have not attained. I have not attained. I want to attain to the what? The resurrection power of Christ. Meaning what? That I have died to self and he's resurrected me. What does it say? I've crucified with Christ. I no longer live. But Christ, what? Lives within me. If the spirit of him who raised Christ from the dead dwells within you, he will give life to your mortal bodies. Quite literally saying that the power of the resurrection that brought Christ back from the dead is present within you if you are in Christ. And if you are his bride, then you have made yourself ready. Then that means that you have come into subjection of Torah. That means that you have come into subjection of the groom. You have gone from willfulness, the right hand, to subjection. Okay? To what? A vessel. Where the yoke is in the position of the right hand. Remember, he said, those who are burdened come to me, for my yoke is light. But you still have to submit. And what's crazy about that is that's at the core of what? Of egoism. That's at the core of narcissism. That's at the core of personality disorders. Your ego just running the show. You on autopilot, allowing your ego to decide what it's going to do. That's the flesh. What's the spirit? The emanation of the divine. Which is what? Has to be put into you. You have to become a vessel of reception in order to receive the emanation of the divine and then become the gift to this world that God designed you for. Every single one of you is a special, unique gift to this world from him, where once you come into this moment, that is now going to what? Come down from him, through you, out to whoever, through your own unique personality that he had nothing to do with, and all the little learnings and all the little special, unique things about you that gives you your own fingerprint and your own DNA signature. So unique that you're traceable if you're a criminal to this world. If you will step into a corporate collective unity of that as a bride. But we need to learn that from authentic Hebrew women willing to go through this process. That's the truth. And so what's crazy, and this is going to blow your mind, the women are our teachers. The women are our leaders. They're the shepherds. They're the ones that are going to show us how to be in a greater relationship with God. And if you're a woman, you know what I'm talking about. You know what it feels like to have intimacy. I don't. Not with God. Because that part of the intimacy can only come from laying down as a virgin, receiving your husband, and becoming filled. And a new thing coming from both God and myself as a result of laying down, allowing that to happen, but also what? That new thing becoming the manifestation, or for lack of better words, the emanation of the intensification of all power in the universe uniquely to this world. See the power of this learning that I gleaned, that I gained, the level of understanding that I began to understand, to walk out. The reason why this is so important is because this is a time in which you need to renew your mind, your soul, your temple. This is Chanukah, from the Hebrew word chanach, which means to renew, to rededicate, to put weightiness back upon. And the weightiness that needs to have, or something that needs to have weightiness that does not, because of bad things that have happened. Remember, I've talked to you about how your wounds don't define who you are. And neither do the epigenetic information that is coming to you define who you are. Women have been exploited. There has been a misogyny. Was it in Scripture the way that the progressive Christian movement presents it? No. This is the model of the intensification of all power in the universe, that the only way for him to be able to pour out blessings, love, existence, light, whatever, is to have had something lesser than him to give it to. It's the grand model of the cosmos in and of itself, contained in one of the most beautiful and amazing physical manifestations of creation, the woman. Everything about her, everything about what she is, what she does, how she feels, what she experiences, you need to learn as the man. And if you're the woman, then you need to look back and ask yourself, when did you stop wanting to allow yourself to be who you were created to be? There was a time when you were a little girl and you loved that you were a little girl. And you loved everything about being a little girl. And there is nothing that's changed in that except horrible life experiences that have made you not want to be what Scripture is telling you to be, the receiver, to teach me how to be the receiver. The change that had to occur in my mind politically. I had to get my mind wrapped around the premise of truth as a function of reality. But I want to show you something. Remember, the Bible is either some ancient document of a misogynistic, murderous, and bloodthirsty people, or it is living and powerful. And that cannot have a gray area. It can't be subject to human opinion. It can't be subject to political agendas. Listen, if the Torah was made flesh and dwelt among us, then we need to understand that the will of God came and tried to teach us as a human being how to live according to it. And what do we get from Yeshua? We get love, benevolence, mercy, right? We get love your enemy. We get pray for those who use you, right? Bless and don't curse, right? We get all of those things. And in addition to all of that, we get him saying, I will be the bridegroom. I have no idea what that means, except that I myself am a bridegroom. But when it comes to the bride, which is the church, we get to the bride, which is Israel, not a replacement of Israel, but is Israel. The bride is Israel. He always says, I was a husband to you in the new covenant. We know he gave a divorce, but it says right in there, I will betroth you again. And we have been betrothed. This marriage supper has not occurred yet. That history has not played itself out yet. Where the Lamb was slain from the foundations of the earth, I'm pretty sure we're married from the foundations of the earth. But the thing is all of that is contingent upon the finiteness of height, width, depth, time right now. And you have not moved into that eternity yet. Now, I want to show you something before we end. And the reason I do is because I want you to understand how simple this becomes. I want you to see how powerfully and quickly we can begin to understand that these things are built into our very soul. The Kof, the Lamed, the Hebrew letters, the ancient pictographic Hebrew letters that were supposedly created by a Neanderthal people have a divine origin. It's built into every one of us. Okay? Here I have a picture. And in this picture, I have a number of things that I see right off the bat. And so I'm going to begin to point those out. I'm going to probably, let's use bright green for this. Hopefully that won't contrast with the other greens in actually, let's just use yellow. Okay, here we go. So let's start at the beginning. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, right? Let's see. Do we have anybody who's actually looking at something and being in awe? We could say this guy kind of looks like a hay, doesn't he? Just like I drew on the board. Hay. Okay, what's next? Vav. We would need a tent peg or a stake. Oh, look, there we are right here. Okay, Vav. Aleph Gimel. Oh, I forgot Dalet. There's Dalet. Aleph Gimel Dalet. Hey, Vav. Zayin. Okay, Zayin. And then we've got, after Zayin, we've got Tet. Okay, let's see. We've got Yod. We've got Kaf. Do we have a Lamed? Do we see a stick? Do we see a stick? Oh, look, there's a stick. Lamed. Mem. Noon. Don't see a thorn per se, but let's say these are thorns. Let's go Samech, Ayin, Pei. Let's see. Sade. Somebody laying down. Kof. Fresh. I don't really see any teeth, but we're just going to say teeth are in the mouth of the person smiling. Sheen. And let's see. Do we have a Tav? Do we have a Tav? Do we have something that marks the property? Let's say these are ancient boundary stones. Let's do that right there. There we go. We have the entire Hebrew alphabet in the simplicity of a child's drawing. Now, obviously, this is probably a mature child, but you get my point. This is built into us, people. This is somebody's imagination coming along and putting somebody by the water, a gimel, right? Putting somebody laying down, a tzadeh. Putting a sigh in the information. I was so excited to find this picture. What's my reasoning behind this? Those ancient letters are the fabric of reality. The ancient pictographic Hebrew tells a story. And we just saw the story of the bride. We saw how there is a time when she is carefree. She is woman. There is a time when she is captive. And there is a time when she is a vessel prepared. And there's a time when she makes the man complete. I don't know how the bride of Yeshua or the bride of Christ or the bride of the Lamb, which would be the better of the three, because it doesn't really necessarily anywhere say bride of Christ, but it does say the marriage supper of the Lamb and his bride has made herself ready. The bride of the Lamb, who happens to also be the bride of God, which would then be Israel, which would then be anybody who's grafted in, names the name of Christ, who is subject to Torah, has brought themselves into subjection, has brought themselves into the non-willfulness of their Christian existence, is preparing themselves to become the corporate collective conscience that will what? And this is so important. And this is the part people don't get. This is the part that people are just totally oblivious to. Revelation chapter 22, verse 17. Let the Spirit and the bride say, come. He ain't coming back until the bride has made herself ready, which means she goes from this to this to this. The yoke becomes the position of honor, and she becomes an observer, a witness, someone who can say, my husband is a good man. That is the entire process of the bride. Not brides, bride, which means what? It's a corporate collective conscience of people who are individually coming into a what? An ego suppression. They're coming into subjection. They are conforming themselves to something outside of their normal willpower, their normal desires, their normal wants, their normal fears, their normal expectations. A change is occurring. And when that change finally occurs and she's able to present herself, therefore now she understands her identity and has truly come into submission, she can say, come, and he will come. He will not come back until then. Promise you that. For those of you who are on YouTube, I will say Shabbat Shalom, and I hope, I really, really, really hope that this wasn't too confusing. I really tried to explain it best I can. But if you have any questions, or if there is anything that you feel like doesn't make sense or whatever, I would encourage you to contact me through whatever contact you have with me, because you have a contact with me if you have not come onto this YouTube channel through the search engine. If you're somebody who's come from the search engine and you now want to communicate with me, you can put it in the comments. I check the comments often, and so I will be able to answer any questions or explain these things to you, because obviously this is a very difficult subject. This is going to require vulnerability. This is going to require trust. And this is going to require an understanding of something deeper in the cosmos than what we want it to be. And I will stand in that place and say, I would rather there be equality, but there isn't. And there's a reason there isn't. And so what's my wisdom compared to the intensification of all power in the universe? At any rate, I'll say Shabbat Shalom. You guys have an amazing day.